these bloodthirsty thugs would never have the first breath of a chance if people weren't ready and willing to accept dictatorship. I hearken again to the line in my poem. As reason was smothered, what are we hearing? My God, can it be the people are cheering? An uneducated people never has been and never will be free. Was that Franklin who said that? Some regimes have been popular not in spite of their irrationality and cruelty, but because of it. You better keep that in mind. There will always be Trotskys and Goldsteins and even Winston Smiths. Now wait a minute. I thought that Trotsky was a... Oh, right, this is Christopher Hitchens. He thinks Trotsky's a good guy. Goldsteins and Winston Smiths don't belong in the company of Trotsky's name. Shame, shame on Hitchens. So there will always be good people, but it must be clearly understood that the odds are overwhelmingly against them. And that with Camus, as with Camus' Rebel, I'll just Camus's Rebel, the crowd will yell with joy to see them dragged to the scaffold. As reason is smothered, what are we hearing? Now we are in chapter 9. I believe this is the last chapter. Now this is called Deconstructing the Postmoderns. Right. Hitchens tries to stay up on all the most popular stuff, even though it's impossible to understand it. He doesn't have the clarity and presence of mind and philosophy to understand that it's impossible to understand it, so he just tries to fake understanding. He tries to put a bit of it over in mentioning things like the redshift problem, he calls it, and the Big Bang Theory and stuff like that. Anyways, here he says that in the last 3 decades of the 20th century, Anglo-Saxondom was itself extensively colonized by the schools of postmodernism and deconstruction of texts. And it's been overrun by those who regard objectivity as an ideology. On the campuses of British and American universities, the works of Foucault and Derrida enjoyed something more than a fashion, right? People have been obsessed with those morons. I do have some Foucault on the shelf above me, and it'll have to be sampled at some point. But just to show you that Hitchens appreciated that this stuff had taken over large swaths of culture, even though he doesn't know what the source of it is, he doesn't know exactly how damaging it is, and he sort of seems to think that a lot of it is sort of benign nonsense, you know, multiculturalism and stuff. He mentions, page 194 here, Jean Baudrillard won golden opinions for such propositions as the fictional nature of the Gulf War, a war which he ironically suggested had not really taken place, right? Because we didn't call it a war, so since we didn't call it a war, it couldn't be something we didn't call it because we create reality, so it wasn't a war. Probably less subtle than that, I don't know. Zorio liked Baudrillard, loved him, probably still does. Okay, so then Hitchens talks about this battle between rational people and this university cult of idiocy and postmodern nonsense. And he says, a new stage in the argument was opened by Professor Alan Sokal, S-O-K-A-L, who in 1997 submitted a satirical article to the journal Social Text. The essay maintained that scientific procedures of testability and experiment were themselves culturally produced or constructed and possessed no independent validity. So outside of the culture that came up with them, they aren't necessarily valid. Now, it was a satirical piece, but it made it past the editors of Social Text. On seeing his preposterous submission accepted and published by the editors, Professor Sokal revealed the hoax. From then on, the debate between the rival academic tendencies took on a slightly rancorous tone. So much so that in January 2000, in the January 2000 issue of the academic journal Lingua Franca, Professor James Miller offered an overview of the scene under the incendiary title. Okay, so here's the title that he gave it. He gave a talk about what's going on. He said, look at this postmodernist stuff in the universities, and look at Professor Sokal and this nonsense, the satire that he sent in as a joke, actually got published as a serious article. And he says in his speech about this, here's the title of his speech: Is bad writing necessary? Right? Do we need to have these postmodernists, Baudrillard and Foucault and Derrida? That's an incendiary title. I was recently called incendiary because somebody said, I was talking about the Muslims and what trouble they are, and somebody said, couldn't somebody have the same views as a Muslim and yet be an atheist? Couldn't they just carry on their cultural way as an atheist? Would you be able to accept that? And I said, no, because a person who's an atheist would never do such disgusting and immoral things as a Muslim does, because they believe they have God's permission. And they said I was being incendiary, and they just huffed and puffed. There's a meaningful quote from Orwell just out of the center of a paragraph. We won't worry about the other parts. Autobiography is not to be trusted unless it reveals something disgraceful. Self-contained out of the center of a sentence. Domination is propagated by the dominated. Some slaves didn't believe that they should be free. That's true. Some women didn't think women should have the vote. There are some women today in Islamic countries that don't think that women should be allowed to drive. They believe that women should be beaten by their husbands. Women believe that, right? So, domination is propagated by the dominated. That's why you can't just say, you gotta get mad, and you gotta say, God damn it, I'm not a slave. No, that's not gonna work. You need a little bit more than to just say, throw off your chains. You need philosophy. You need ideas. You need really serious, deep ideas that people spend their lives sorting out. That's how you get freedom. Not by getting mad and saying, I'm not a piece of property. Well, if that's all you got, someone's going to turn you into a piece of property real soon. You need philosophy, not anger. Well, we could mix them. Okay, 1984, the original title of which was, suggestively enough, The Last Man in Europe, right? Because think of Winston being like the last man as such. Everyone else had been reduced. And he was reduced too in the end. He too knew this feeling of being the last Roman, waiting for the barbarians. Interesting. The Last Man in Britain, Last Man in Europe is going to be the title. The Last Roman, waiting for the barbarians. Perfect, beautiful similarity there. Winston Smith addresses his doomed text thus. Here's Winston Smith writing. To the future or to the past, to a time when thought is free, when men are different from one another and do not live alone, to a time when truth exists and what is done cannot be undone. From the age of uniformity, from the age of solitude, from the age of Big Brother, from the age of doublethink, greetings. That is sad. It's a fictional passage from Winston Smith in 1984, but it was sort of what Orwell was saying to the world. He was sort of speaking through Winston Smith. And Hitchens says, here is a gesture to stand in comparison with Adorno's image of Nietzsche leaving behind messages in bottles on the flood of barbarism bursting on Europe. Nietzsche leaves behind messages in bottles, which were actually to cause more trouble. I mean, you can't give him much credit. Skipping down a ways now, Adorno, who wrote that line about Nietzsche, also wrote the following line: no poetry after Auschwitz. Hitchens calls it a statement that's as profound as it is absurd, because you can't eliminate poetry. You might eliminate stand-up comedy. That's what people try to do after 9/11, right? September 11th, 2001. Comedian shows went off the air for weeks, and people tried not to be... everybody was sad and shocked. And he says there, Auschwitz has happened. We're all serious now.